Hi, you're watching a documentary business webinar. I'm Peter Hamilton, and back from Rio, Ed Hersh and Dan Salerno, both legendary veteran executives
Mhm.
and senior consultants to our unscripted, factual documentary niche. And they're going to share their takeaways about the doings at Rio at World Congress of Science and Factual Producers. So we're going to keep it snappy. It's a busy time of year. And let's start with you, Ed. Takeaway number one.
Well, I think the takeaway number one is that markets like this and the Congress really is a mirror of the business. So for better or worse, it really was a terrific chance to get to see what was going on. And of course, right now it's an industry that is at an inflection point. Markets are at an inflection point. So the takeaway was that on one hand, this reflected some of the turmoil and uncertainty about commissions and transformation to digital and discoverability. It also reflected what I thought was a new sense of optimism and a sense of we're in this together and we're going to try to solve it. So ultimately, it was bracing and a wonderful location, but it also was it was a wake up call that the industry is changing, and that but a very optimistic and positive vibe.
Dan.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll probably have a takeaway that it sort of relates to that a little bit later, but I think Ed is spot on. It sort of reemphasizes, I think, the need to meet in person. We've talked a lot about that, all three of us, in various iterations over the years. But the conference itself kind of has a little bit of everything. I mean, it's a small, tight conference. It's about 400 people there this year, with really good representation out of Europe, primarily. And it sort of does reflect very much, as Ed points out, sort of the range of things that are going on between linear and nonlinear and all. Probably a good number of the things I think both Ed and I'll share as our own subsequent takeaways in this conversation.
So, Ed, takeaway number two.
Uh, it's the demand is not the issue. There are more people watching more things on more screens than ever before, and you know that from your own. We know that from our own observations, right? And we also know it at this conference. The question is the how do producers and platforms monetize that? Because the question is there, for all of the talk about YouTube, actually a very small percentage of YouTube creators actually make money at this. And there was some wonderful conversation there. There was a very senior guy from YouTube, Kevin Aloka, who's the head of their trends and culture. He's not their business guy, but viewing trends. We know everybody's sort of going to YouTube, but the question is, as audiences migrate to digital, both streaming and to social platforms, how do you monetize that as opposed to these giant blue chip projects which are fewer and farther between, that Nat Geo does, that the BBC does, with funding cuts at PBS and elsewhere. So there was a lot of conversation around that was very, very instructive and helpful. I'm not sure it resolved anything, but it really showed what people were talking about. And I think that there was a sense walking away that um, the fact that there's demand is so high for this stuff. People are watching it. They're watching it on YouTube. They're watching it on social platforms. They're watching it on linear. They're watching it on streaming. But the problem is, how do you actually make money at it as linear TV and the linear business model, advertising model fades? And I think that Dan and I talked about the fact one of the lines out of it was great, which was these big projects, fewer, bigger, better. So that's good news for some of those big streaming platforms, not so much for independent producers who are trying to pitch their projects.
Dan.
Yeah. It's the kind of the little summary that I kind of I put in my head coming off the back of it that I was talking about with Ed is that YouTube is the future. We keep hearing that constantly, but it's not necessarily the answer. And and
Well said.
Ed, I think it was on your panel, wasn't it, that there was a statistic thrown out there that like 91% of all YouTube posts or channels or something don't break a certain threshold to make any money.
Correct.
And get ad share revenue. The fact is it's really the people who are making money as a living off of YouTube is very, very small. So anybody stretching into YouTube, which they have to do, you're not going to survive without it. You've got to get out there in these nonlinear platforms, but they're not going to be the answer. You can't just throw away your linear business as an independent producer in the process. You've got to find a way to live in both and figure it out. And that, I think, is the challenge that faces the group at the Congress as well as the industry as a whole, that we'll continue to see wrestled with in any number of the different forums as we head into 26.
So question, were there any buyers there, traditional network buyers?
Traditional, I would say yes, in a sense. I mean, National Geographic had a couple of folks there. The European public broadcasters did have mostly commissioning editors, I would say, and strand editors and things like that. They're always on the lookout. But to actually say that there was this group of people running around kind of with a notebook looking to buy acquisitions, you'd be hard pressed to say there was a long list of those.
Peter, you raised a really interesting point. And I think it gets, I was going to say this later, but it gets to the heart of how these have morphed. They are, it is clearly a buyer's market. A lot of times, those pitches and sales with Zoom and the ability to meet digitally, what I think is the sense I got from all this, that those days of real screen with 1,500 attendees and senior executives from all over the world, they are taking competitive pitches and agents there. Those days are over, and those markets are over. And so what this has evolved into, and I think Dan and I kind of agree on this, is going to this as for us as consultants, for producers and network executives, is really an opportunity to sort of collaborate, to take the pulse of the business, to get a sense of where people's thinking are today and tomorrow. Are there interesting funding models? Are there new platforms? It was more of a collaborative session, and Dan, you pointed out, I think when we were talking yesterday, that that the sort of gloom and doom stuff, people are sort of putting that behind them, and now they're actually looking for solutions. And I thought there were some really uplifting and interesting, serious, not downbeat, but serious conversations about where everything's going.
Right.
Yeah.
So much we can talk about. Dan, let's move on to your second takeaway.
Yeah, I think, one of the other things that I wanted to highlight was that it was sort of mixed throughout. And I think it's to Ed's point again, reflective of the business itself. AI, artificial intelligence, right? I mean, it permeated either directly. There were at least 2 sessions directly devoted to it in different ways. Indirectly throughout all of the sessions, from the beginning session with What's the Buzz right to the very end. And what was fascinating to me about AI, and it's not just about the Congress, but the broader discussion around AI, is a year ago, one of the greatest panels they had was an AI panel. And it was about this debate of whether in the world that we live in, it was journalistically responsible to use AI, what were the ethics of it, what were the morals of it, and so forth. 12 months later, the discussion was barely around, I think, sort of the ethics of using it, and more about here's how I am using it. Look at this great project I've got going right now, going for the future. It was definitely more in how we're utilizing AI to advance storytelling and cut costs. And there was really direct conversations without any debate about both of those factors. I mean, Ed, would you agree that it was sort of like, look at my great show and I did it for half the price?
I agree. I think, even as far back as Tokyo and Glasgow congresses and there was the thing about, gee whiz, look at all the cool stuff AI can do, and like somebody showing off a new toy. And I think that this was much more focused on, okay, I'm using AI. Here's how I'm using it. Here's how it cut my costs. Here's how we're using it for storytelling. And yeah, sure, here are the guardrails that we have internally at our company. But you're right, it wasn't like, gee whiz, there's this new thing called AI. It was, okay, AI's here. Everybody's using it for something. How can we use it, especially in the world of shrinking budgets and more demanding commissions?
Yeah, that's been our position here at Documentary Business. We had those wonderful webinars, instructive webinars with Philip Shane that are available on the Documentary Business store, for example. And our position has been, you've got to learn how to use it. Don't get sidetracked on the moral issues, even though they're and ethical issues, even though they're obviously incredibly
Absolutely.
important. Let's go to your third takeaway, Ed.
Yeah, I think that the fact that as we sort of said, that I guess perhaps the third takeaway is the packed sessions told the story. People are interested in AI. People are interested in transformation. And the big takeaway, to me, the big third takeaway from this is the days of producers walking into commissioners and saying, I got your next big project, and throwing a 4-color brochure down on the table, or playing a pitch tape and say, what do you think? Those days are over. And there's a need for a new flexibility, because platforms are commissioning fewer, as I said, fewer shows, bigger shows. The linear networks are fading. They still need returnable series. And so, but it has to be a dialogue with the channel. You can't go in and give the same pitch to 5 different people. You have to start with a conversation to say, okay, where are you guys headed? Where are you going? What problem can I, as a producer, solve for you? Okay, what is the biggest problem you have, and how can you meet it? And also, okay, we can't fund the whole thing. You're going to have to find funding elsewhere. Okay, now you have to go talk to people about that. So it really requires a much less, this sounds harsh, a less entitled sensibility, and more of a sensibility of, you've got a lot of problems, platforms. I want to try to solve them for you as a producer, and I need to listen and be flexible. That's the key. Flexible in format, flexible in funding, flexible in length, flexible even in storytelling. And I think that Dan, I can't speak for you, but I think what we probably both saw is, in the conversations we listened in on and the conversations we had with people, the people who are having really great conversations were the people who were adopting that point of view. It certainly came through in all the panels.
So here's the challenge. Going to ask you, Dan. I agree with Ed, but that means you have to be in conversations. So where are you going to be in conversations? You're going to be in conversations at markets. And what are we learning in our discussion about the future of markets? Sunnyside just announced, wonderful Sunnyside, that they're suspending 2026. Hot Docs, which is such an incredible platform for pitching back in the day, is removing its industry panels. So there are fewer opportunities now. The markets are shrinking. What are producers, what are developers going to do to get into the conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've wrestled with that as well, haven't we, Ed? I think it's, it's like anything else, right? There's a winnowing out with C21's entrance into the market with, content fill in the geographical area. They really started to show a presence across the globe, right? It's not just Europe and the Americas with the C21 conferences. But I have to admit, I've never attended one, so I can't comment on their format. But they strike me as good gathering grounds, at least on a regional basis, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think producers, distributors, indies will have to kind of make their own decisions as to where to allocate their travel budgets. I do think what the risk is, though, and this is something that I know we've all talked about in various circles, is there's a cost of entry. And you take something like this experience that we just had last week, which was fantastic with the Science Congress. There's a registration cost, there's a travel cost, there's an expense to be in the region. And that immediately starts to narrow the aperture on, how many people can afford to spend $3,000 to $5,000 per individual to do these things, and are they going to get enough ROI on that? And those are real conversations for indies. So, in some ways, there's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy as we talk about, some of I think the positive things that I certainly felt. I know Ed and I talked about it. There seems to be, a year ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, every one of these conferences in any kind, the producers were all talking about how the 1,000 hours is now 800 hours, right, in terms of commissions. And oh my God, the 200 missing hours is really going to cause the death of my business, my industry, my direction. People are focusing on the 800 hours now. They're not focusing on the 200 missing. They're focusing on the 800 opportunities. And I heard that from the beginning of this conference to the end about these great conversations and directions and the volume they're doing. But as I thought about that, a lot of these are kind of, the production companies themselves are of a certain size and threshold that can afford the cost of entry into a real screen, into a NatP, into a MIP, into a C21 conference and a Science Congress and so forth.
But
So
Dan,
I do wonder if there's a
Dan, I
limited
agree with you.
involvement.
If I can jump in, Dan, I think that I agree with you mostly, but I do think that first of all, you have to look at these gatherings in a different way. They are not markets, and we call them markets, but they're not. What they are really a sort of gathering. It's really a community. It's like community matters, right? And it was like a global support group and exchange of ideas. And that's how you have to look at these. You can't look at these as I'm going to go there, I'm going to spend a lot of money on creating pitches, and somehow I'm going to get my $1 million commission. So
sounds like a Quaker circle and not a stock exchange.
Correct. Nice way to put it. Excellent. Very true. And as a result, okay, but the good news is, and I don't want to denigrate these gatherings like this because they're great and I had a good time and met a lot of people. But the advent post-COVID, the advent of Zoom and the advent of video conferences, you don't have to wait until these. I think, Dan, you told me a story how you were trying to grab somebody in the hall to talk to them and realized you worked in DC, you live in DC, and she lives in DC. Why don't you just have coffee next week and not try to catch each other in the hall? And Peter, I'm sure you've had the same thing. You live in New York. Okay, you meet these people, say, can we catch up? No, and it turns out they live 6 blocks from you in Brooklyn. So I think that while they're great and they're supportive and you get a lot of ideas, I really feel like you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for these conferences. All of these places need good ideas. And if you're a producer trying to pitch, there are other ways in to have the conversation. Now, maybe you begin the conversation on Zoom, maybe you begin the conversation at a conference, but this isn't an annual event. Oh my God, I missed my chance to meet somebody from Nat Geo. That's ridiculous now in the world of Zoom. So
it really is.
Yeah.
So, I'm with you, but there's just the serendipity of a personal connection at a market. I can't tell you how many clients, how many projects have been sparked by attending a conference, and it's not in the session, it's at the coffee afterwards or the drinks 100%. Before. as the conference business, as its services, unscripted and documentary television shrinks, I feel the loss both personally and professionally. Look, I want to finish up. It's the holiday season here, and I know we could all talk for ages and ages. Let's give each of you like a minute for your final takeaway on World Congress in Rio, what happened and what it means. 1 minute each. Start with
Dan,
you, Ed.
Yeah, I'll
Dan,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Dan, you go, Dan.
Yeah, I'll kick that off. We've said a lot of it already, so I won't sort of repeat it. I think conferences do remain valuable. I think Ed is right that you've got to adapt and evolve to what the conferences are instead of forcing them into a model that has become obsolete. And then I think the other thing that we've touched on a bit that I would want to emphasize, continue to emphasize here, Peter, when you talk about serendipity, for me, serendipity entered the picture at this particular Congress when it came actually to digital. Okay, the Congress really made an exerted effort to put digital more. I kind of described it as they took them off of the kids' table at Thanksgiving, which is an American term for your international audience, and they moved them to the adult table, and they gave them a seat that was equal. And you felt that through not just the digital half a day on Monday, but also throughout the course of the Congress itself. There were folks that were YouTube influencers, YouTube producers, science sort of channels on YouTube and so forth that were integrated into panels organically with linear commissioners and editors. And I think that is part of the pivot that our industry is going to. And the serendipity of the conference and the Congress in this instance very much allowed those younger voices or newer voices access to folks like Ed and myself and a lot of the other veterans that maybe normally they wouldn't run into on a quick Zoom.
That's a great takeaway. Great takeaway,
Yeah.
Dan. So Ed, your final takeaway.
Yeah, and again, I sort of come back to where I began, which is that there was a sense of optimism among this upheaval and the realization that despite all these platforms and business models changing, it's not like we're making hula hoops here. There really is this interest in science and nature. There's a tremendous interest in crime. Obviously, outside of the science and nature area, there's music and sports documentaries. And all you need to do is look at Netflix and Amazon and other platforms to know that these are that nonfiction and documentaries continues to be a mainstay of streamers. It may not be the big buzzworthy drama series, and that came across and in the discussion. And I think my biggest takeaway is this is not a dying industry. It is a industry at an inflection point, and it's an industry that's going to require a lot more discussion and working out. And we're not there yet of the business model and requires a new flexibility in I have an idea. Now I have to work with people to figure out the best way to execute that. I can't walk in and just state what my idea is. So I walked away in addition to it being, and take a second to say what a beautiful setting it was. And it was just gorgeous there. And it was very conducive to sitting outside and having a drink, almost con-like in the discussion in location. But it really was a great place to sort of think about those things and share those ideas. To me, the thing to me, it's not about the deal. To me, my takeaway is this wasn't about the deal or the deals. It was about the insight. And that's what I took away from it.
That's really great. And listen, on behalf of everyone who attended and wish they attended and my readers, thank you both for your contributions. You both produced sessions that were really well received. And I know how much voluntary work that takes. Dan particularly produced What's the Buzz, which is that kind of flagship session that launches World Congress. And Ed, your work is greatly appreciated. So thank you. And thank you to Paul Lewis and the World Congress team for putting on this event for our community. Thanks for your takeaways. I'm sorry we don't have time in the holiday season to go on for another hour, but it's really great to have you with us.
Sure. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks for asking me to share this with you.